I was 68 years old when I heard my granddaughter's terrified scream in the middle of the night. "That's not my mother." Those 5 words shattered the careful silence I'd maintained for years about what I found in my late son's desk. A psychiatric report documenting his wife's 5 distinct personalities. One of them dangerous. When my own daughter stood in court and declared, "Mom was right, you're mentally ill," I knew I'd lost everything. But what do you do when the only proof you have is locked in a safe, and the woman raising your granddaughter becomes a different person with each passing hour? Sometimes the most dangerous monsters aren't the ones under the bed, but the ones who tuck us in at night. If you've ever had to choose between keeping a devastating secret or risking everything to protect someone you love, this story will break your heart. Follow this channel for more emotional true stories that will keep you up at night. Like and comment where you're watching from. The truth is often more terrifying than fiction. I still remember the exact moment when my life crumbled for the second time. The digital clock on my nightstand read 2:17 a.m. when that scream tore through my house, a sound I'll never forget as long as I live. "That's not my mother." The words pierced the darkness, followed by desperate, heaving sobs that seemed to shake the very foundation of my home. I'm Richard Caldwell, 68 years old, with knees that protest every morning and a heart that's weathered more storms than most. That night I bolted upright from a fitful sleep, my body moving before my mind could catch up. I scrambled for my glasses, nearly knocking over the framed photo of my late son, Thomas. The hallway stretched before me like a tunnel, the distance to my granddaughter's room seemingly infinite. Each creaking step on that old staircase felt like an eternity. As my heart pounded with such force I thought it might give out right there. That wouldn't have been surprising. Doctors had warned me about stress after my bypass surgery last year. "Abby," I called out, my voice cracking. "Abigail, honey, I'm coming." When I finally reached her door and flung it open, the scene before me froze my blood. There was my granddaughter, 11-year-old Abigail, pressed against the headboard of her bed, her face pale as moonlight, tears streaming down her cheeks. And there was Natalie, my son's ex-wife, standing over her, gripping Abby's thin arms with such force that I could see white fingerprints forming on the child's skin. But something was wrong, terribly wrong. Natalie's posture was rigid, unnaturally straight, her head tilted at an odd angle, and her eyes, God, her eyes, they were vacant, like someone had pulled a shade down behind them. Empty, hollow, not the eyes of the woman who'd charmed her way into my son's life 15 years ago. "Grandpa," Abigail cried when she saw me, her small body trembling violently. "Help me. That woman, that's not my mom from before. Something's wrong with her." Natalie slowly turned toward me, her movements mechanical, like a doll being manipulated by invisible strings. Her lips stretched into what I suppose was meant to be a smile, but it never reached those dead eyes. "Richard," she said, her voice unusually deep, almost guttural. The child had a nightmare. Nothing to concern yourself with. But it wasn't her voice. Not really. I'd known Natalie for nearly 2 decades, and this wasn't her. The cadence was wrong, the tone unfamiliar. In that moment, everything came rushing back. The psychiatric report I'd discovered in Thomas's desk after the accident. The detailed notes about Natalie's condition that I'd sealed away in my safe, promising myself I'd never reveal them. For Abby's sake, for my daughter Madison's sake, for the sake of what remained of our fractured family. 5 personalities, the report had stated. 5 distinct identities, documented over 18 months of secret therapy sessions that Thomas had arranged before his death. Sessions that ended abruptly when Natalie refused to continue treatment, claiming she was cured. I'd hidden it all away. What good would it do to expose her? Thomas was gone, killed in that senseless highway pileup 3 years ago. Madison, my daughter, practically worshipped Natalie, seeing in her the maternal figure she'd lost when her own mother abandoned us 30 years earlier. And Abby, sweet, innocent Abby, she needed stability, not another trauma. So I'd said nothing, done nothing, convinced myself it was under control. But now, watching Natalie's face shift subtly as she stared at me, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake, one that could cost my granddaughter everything. "Let go of her," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Now, Natalie." Something flickered across her face. Recognition, perhaps, or annoyance at being interrupted. Her grip on Abby loosened slightly. "It's the middle of the night," she replied, her voice suddenly higher, softer. More like the Natalie I knew. The child needs discipline. Structure. You undermine my authority, Richard. You always have. Abby's eyes darted between us, wide with fear and something else. Recognition. She saw it too. The shifts. The changes. She'd been living with this woman for 3 years since Thomas died, seeing what the rest of us had been too blind or too willing to ignore. I stepped forward, my hands outstretched. Abby, come here, honey. She didn't hesitate. The moment Natalie's grip slackened, Abby bolted from the bed and ran into my arms, burying her face against my old flannel robe. She changes, Grandpa, she whispered, her small body shaking against mine. Sometimes she's nice, but then she turns into someone else. Her voice gets different. Her face gets different. Sometimes she doesn't even know who I am. Before I could respond, the bedroom light flipped on. Madison stood in the doorway, her dark hair disheveled from sleep, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. What's going on? She demanded, looking between us. Dad, it's the middle of the night. Why are you in here upsetting everyone? Natalie's posture instantly changed. Her shoulders relaxed, her face softened, and tears welled in her eyes. In the span of seconds, she transformed from the rigid, threatening figure into a fragile, confused woman. I don't know what happened, Madison, she said, her voice trembling. I heard Abby crying. I came to check on her, and then your father burst in, accusing me of, I don't even know what. She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking with what appeared to be sobs. Madison rushed to her side, putting an arm around her shoulders. It's okay, Nat. It's okay. She looked at me, her expression hardening. Dad, this has to stop. These paranoid episodes of yours. The doctor said your medication might cause confusion, but this is getting out of hand. I stood there, my granddaughter clinging to me, the weight of realization pressing down on my chest. My own daughter thought I was the one losing my grip on reality. Madison, I began, choosing my words carefully. This isn't what you think. There's something you need to know. Not now, Dad. She cut me off. It's late. We're all tired. Let's talk in the morning when you're clearer. The implication hung in the air between us. When you're saner. As Madison led a still sobbing Natalie from the room, Natalie turned back just for a moment. Our eyes met, and I saw it. A flash of something calculating, aware, a slight curl at the corner of her mouth. Then it was gone, replaced by the mask of the victim. That night I held Abby until she fell into an exhausted sleep. I sat in the rocking chair by her bed, watching the rise and fall of her small chest, my mind racing with impossible decisions. The report in my safe, the evidence I'd hidden away, the truth I'd tried to bury. In the soft glow of Abby's nightlight, I made a promise to my granddaughter and to the memory of my son. This time I wouldn't stay silent. This time, I would fight, even if it meant losing everything else. Because some truths can't remain hidden, no matter how much we wish they could. And sometimes, the most dangerous monsters aren't the ones under the bed, but the ones who tuck us in at night. I couldn't sleep that night after putting Abby back to bed. My old bones protested as I sat in my study, staring at the locked safe hidden behind the portrait of my late wife, Catherine. Inside that safe was the truth. A truth I'd buried for 3 years, convincing myself it was for the best. The weight of my silence felt heavier than ever, as the first light of dawn filtered through the blinds. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 6 times when I heard small footsteps padding down the stairs. Abby appeared in the doorway of my study, still in her pajamas with the faded unicorns that were now too small for her. Dark circles shadowed her eyes so much like Thomas's that sometimes it hurt to look at her. Morning, Pumpkin, I said, trying to sound cheerful. You're up early. She didn't smile. Instead, she clutched something to her chest. Her sketchbook, the one Madison had given her for her 11th birthday last month. Without a word, she crossed the room and placed it in my lap, then took a step back, watching me expectantly. What's this? I asked, though something in her solemn expression made my stomach tighten with apprehension. Open it, Grandpa, she whispered. I need to show you something, but you can't tell anyone, not even Aunt Madison. My arthritic fingers fumbled with the spiral binding. Abby had always been artistic, another trait she'd inherited from Thomas. The first few pages contained the usual drawings you'd expect from a child her age. Horses, rainbows, our old golden retriever, Max, who'd passed away last spring. But then, on page 12, everything changed. There, meticulously drawn with colored pencils, were 5 distinct faces. all unmistakably Natalie's, yet somehow different from one another. Same hair, same basic features, but the expressions, the eyes, the subtle details, they were like variations on a theme, 5 different interpretations of the same woman. Below the drawing, in Abby's careful handwriting, were the words, "The mom who hugs me, the mom who yells, the mom who cries, the mom who scares me, the mom who disappears." My hands began to tremble. The psychiatric report had names for them all, clinical terms, diagnoses, detailed session notes. But Abby had seen them too, identified them in her own way, through a child's eyes. "Abby," I said softly, "how long have you been seeing these different versions of your mom?" She sank into the leather chair across from me, suddenly looking much older than her 11 years, since after Daddy died. At first I thought she was just sad, but then she trailed off, picking at a loose thread on her pajama pants. Sometimes she doesn't remember things, big things, like my school play or doctor appointments, and sometimes she calls me different names. "What names?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from the report. "Sometimes she calls me Sarah," Abby said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "And once when she was really angry, she called me Mother. That was the scary one." Her voice gets deep and her face goes all tight. I felt a chill run through me. Martin. That was the name in the report for the protective male personality, the one who had emerged, according to the therapist's notes, after a childhood of abuse at the hands of Natalie's mother. I was about to ask more when the front door opened. Madison's voice called out, "Dad? Abby? We brought breakfast." Abby's eyes widened in panic. She snatched the sketchbook from my lap and whispered urgently, "Don't tell. She won't believe you anyway." She never does. By the time Madison entered the study with Natalie trailing behind her, Abby had tucked the sketchbook under the cushion of her chair and plastered on a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning," Natalie chirped, her voice light and cheerful, completely different from the person I'd encountered in the middle of the night. She carried a pink bakery box. "We brought those cinnamon rolls you like, Richard. Peace offering for all the drama last night." I watched her closely. This was the Natalie everyone knew and loved. Warm, thoughtful, the perfect mother and daughter-in-law. If I hadn't seen her last night, if I didn't know what was in that report, I might have believed it myself. Madison set coffee cups on my desk. "Dad, about last night," she began, but I cut her off. "It's fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Probably just my medication." Like you said. Relief washed over Madison's face. At 43, my daughter had endured enough tragedy for one lifetime. Losing her mother to abandonment, then her brother to a car accident. I couldn't blame her for wanting to believe in the perfect family Natalie seemed to offer. But as we sat together, making small talk over breakfast, I noticed how Abby flinched when Natalie reached out to brush crumbs from her face, how she positioned herself to keep me between them, how her eyes never left Natalie's face, watching, waiting, like a small animal alert for predators. After breakfast, Madison insisted on cleaning up. "You two go relax," she said. "Natalie and I will take care of this." Once they disappeared into the kitchen, Abby tugged on my sleeve and motioned for me to follow her upstairs. In her bedroom, she closed the door quietly and went straight to her closet. Standing on tiptoes, she reached to the highest shelf and pulled down a shoebox decorated with stickers. "I've been collecting evidence," she whispered, with a seriousness that broke my heart. An 11-year-old shouldn't know about collecting evidence. Like in those detective shows Daddy used to watch with me. Inside the box were scraps of paper, photographs, and what looked like journal entries. Abby pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it to me. "I found this in Mom's coat pocket last week when I was looking for lunch money." The note was written in an elegant script I didn't recognize. "Martin, the medication is making us weak. They're trying to silence us. Only you can protect the child from them. Remember the plan. L.L. Lilly." The 5th personality documented in the report, the one the therapist had been most concerned about. "Grandpa," Abby's voice quivered as she looked up at me with those Thomas eyes full of fear. "I think something bad is going to happen, and no one will believe me because I'm just a kid." I pulled her into my arms, feeling her small frame shudder against my chest. "I believe you, Pumpkin," I whispered into her hair. "And I promise you, I won't let anything bad happen." It was a promise I intended to keep, even if it cost me everything else. Even if it meant facing the truth I'd hidden away for too long. 3 days after discovering Abby's hidden evidence, Madison called to invite me to dinner at their house. Natalie's making her famous pot roast, she said, her voice deliberately upbeat. She wants to smooth things over after the misunderstanding the other night. I knew what this was, an olive branch, a chance to pretend everything was normal. Part of me wanted to refuse, to protect myself from the charade. But another part, the part that had spent 40 years as a structural engineer calculating risk and stability, knew I needed more information, more evidence. "I'll be there," I said, trying to match her cheerful tone. "What time?" 6:30, Madison replied. "And Dad? Try to be, pleasant." The implication stung, but I swallowed my pride. "Of course, sweetheart. See you then." That evening, I stood on the porch of the colonial-style house my son had purchased just 2 years before his death. The autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves, reminding me of all the Octobers Thomas would never see. I straightened my tie, the blue one Catherine had given me on our last anniversary together before cancer took her, and rang the doorbell. Abby answered, her face lighting up when she saw me. She wore a neatly pressed dress I'd never seen before, her hair pulled back with a ribbon that matched the fabric exactly. "Grandpa," she exclaimed, throwing her arms around my waist. As she hugged me, she whispered, "She's been cleaning all day. The nice one is here." The nice one. Aaron, according to the report, the nurturing personality, the one who cooked and cleaned and presented the perfect facade to the world. The house was immaculate, gleaming with polish and warmth. Family photos lined the mantel, many featuring Thomas with his bright smile, frozen in time at 35 years old. Classical music played softly from hidden speakers, and the aroma of slow-cooked beef and herbs filled the air. It was a perfect domestic scene, one that made my chest ache with both longing and suspicion. Natalie emerged from the kitchen wearing an apron over a floral dress, her honey blonde hair swept into an elegant twist. "Richard, right on time." She approached me with a graceful movement, kissing my cheek lightly. "Madison's just opening the wine. Please make yourself comfortable." I watched her carefully as she glided back to the kitchen. Her posture was different from the night of Abby's scream, softer, more fluid. Even her voice had a melodic quality that had been absent that night. To an outside observer, she would appear to be the perfect hostess, the grieving widow who had pulled herself together for the sake of her child. But I knew better, or at least I thought I did. Madison appeared with 2 glasses of Merlot, handing one to me with a smile that seemed a bit too forced. "You look nice, Dad. New sweater?" "Old one, actually," I replied, accepting the wine. "Your mother bought it for me before, well, a long time ago." A flicker of sadness crossed Madison's face at the mention of her mother. Eleanor had walked out when Madison was just 12, unable to handle the responsibilities of motherhood. It had left a wound that never fully healed, a wound that made Madison particularly vulnerable to Natalie's maternal performance. Dinner was served precisely at 6:30, the table set with the fine china Thomas and Natalie had received as wedding gifts. I took my seat across from Madison, with Natalie at the head of the table and Abby beside me. The pot roast was arranged artfully on a serving platter, surrounded by roasted vegetables that had been cut with mathematical precision. "This looks wonderful, Natalie," I said, genuinely impressed despite my misgivings. She beamed, though the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thank you. I spent all afternoon on it. I wanted tonight to be special, to put that unfortunate incident behind us." Madison nodded approvingly, but Abby remained silent, her eyes fixed on her empty plate. As Natalie began serving the food, I noticed her hands trembling slightly. She paused, closing her eyes briefly, then continued as if nothing had happened. But something had shifted, a subtle change in the air, like the pressure drop before a storm. When she placed a plate in front of me, her fingers brushed against mine. They were ice cold. "Your portion is slightly larger, Richard," she said, her voice now clipped and precise with a faint accent I couldn't place. "Men of your age need proper nutrition to maintain optimal cognitive function." I stared at her, startled by the change. This wasn't Aaron anymore. The report had mentioned another personality, Cassie, the efficient, somewhat clinical caretaker who had emerged during Natalie's nursing school days. "Thank you," I responded cautiously. Natalie tilted her head, studying me with an intensity that made the hair on my arms stand up. Then she straightened, smoothing her apron. "You're most welcome, Doctor." The table went silent. Madison's fork clattered against her plate. Abby's eyes widened, darting between us. "What did you call me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Natalie blinked rapidly, confusion crossing her features. I called you Richard, of course. What else would I call you? But her voice had changed again, softer now, uncertain. Madison laughed nervously. Dad, are you sure your hearing aid is working properly? Natalie definitely said Richard. I knew what I'd heard. Doctor was what Natalie had called her psychiatrist. Dr. Mercer. In the sessions documented in the report, it was how the personality known as Cassie had addressed him, with that same clinical detachment. Must be my mistake, I conceded, not wanting to escalate the situation with Abby present. Under the table, my granddaughter's small hand found mine squeezing tightly. She had heard it too. The rest of the meal progressed with forced pleasantries. Madison chatted about her work at the law firm. Natalie responded with appropriate interest, and I contributed just enough to avoid seeming withdrawn. Only Abby remained mostly silent, pushing food around her plate and flinching whenever Natalie addressed her directly. As Natalie cleared the dishes, declining help from either Madison or myself, Abby whispered, "She keeps checking the clock, every 3 minutes exactly. She never did that before." I'd noticed it too, the precise repetitive movement of Natalie's eyes to the ornate wall clock, then back to whatever task she was performing. It was mechanical, almost compulsive. When Natalie returned with coffee and an apple pie that looked like it belonged in a magazine photograph, Madison excused herself to use the restroom. The moment she was gone, Natalie's posture changed again. She leaned toward me, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You shouldn't be interfering, Richard. The child is being properly managed. Your presence disrupts the system." I felt a chill run through me. "What system, Natalie?" Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I saw something dark flash across her face. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished. She straightened up, the perfect hostess once more, just as Madison returned. "Who wants pie?" Natalie asked brightly, as if the previous exchange had never happened. Later, as I prepared to leave, Natalie handed me my coat with a warm smile. "It was so lovely having you, Richard. We should do this more often." But as I turned to say goodbye to Abby, I caught sight of Natalie's reflection in the hallway mirror. She wasn't smiling anymore. She was watching me with an expression of cold calculation that made my blood run cold. On the drive home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just sat across the table from not one, but at least 3 different people, all wearing the same face. And one of them, perhaps more, saw me as a threat. A week passed with an uneasy quiet. Madison had taken Abby to school each morning, and Natalie had been perfectly pleasant during the few brief interactions we'd had when I'd stopped by to drop off some of Thomas's old books that Abby had asked for. Everything seemed normal, too normal, like the artificial calm before a devastating storm. I spent my days researching dissociative identity disorder, combing through medical journals and case studies until my eyes burned. At night, I'd lie awake, the ceiling fan spinning above me like the wheels of my mind, churning through possibilities and consequences. The more I learned, the more certain I became that Abby was in danger, and that no one would believe me without irrefutable proof. That proof came on a rainy Tuesday night in late October. I was halfway through a TV documentary about bridge construction when my cell phone rang. The screen displayed Abby's name. She'd insisted I buy her a phone for emergencies after the night of the scream, and Madison had reluctantly agreed. "Grandpa," her voice was barely audible, a frightened whisper that sent my heart racing. "Abby, what's wrong?" I was already on my feet, searching for my car keys. "She's talking to the mirror again," Abby whispered. "Aunt Madison is working late, and Mom, she locked herself in the bathroom an hour ago. She's been talking in that deep voice, the man voice. Martin, the protective male personality." "Where are you now?" I asked, grabbing my raincoat from the hook by the door. "In my closet," she replied. "The door to my room is locked." I pushed my dresser against it too. Smart girl. My granddaughter had the instincts of a survivor. "I'm coming, Pumpkin. Stay where you are, stay quiet. I'll be there in 15 minutes. I made it in 12, driving through the torrential rain with a recklessness that would have horrified me under normal circumstances. The windshield wipers couldn't keep up with the downpour, and lightning split the sky in jagged bursts, illuminating the empty suburban streets in stark, momentary flashes. I used the spare key Thomas had given me years ago, entering the house as quietly as possible. The foyer was dark, but a thin strip of light spilled from beneath the bathroom door at the top of the stairs. And there was something else. A voice, low and guttural, engaged in what sounded like a one-sided conversation. I crept up the stairs, wincing at each creak of the old wood. As I approached the bathroom, the voice became clearer. I protect, I command, I am the father now. The words were spoken in a deep register that bore no resemblance to Natalie's usual melodic tones. They won't take her away. Not like they took the others. The doctor doesn't understand, he never understood. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone. With trembling fingers, I opened the recording app and held it toward the door. Evidence. I needed evidence. The girl sees too much, the voice continued. She knows about us, about the transitions. Eleanor says we should tell her everything, but Lily disagrees. Lily thinks she's a threat. I felt my blood turn to ice. Lily, the fifth personality, the one the therapist had deemed potentially dangerous in the report. Suddenly, the voice shifted, becoming higher, almost childlike. But she's just a little girl. She needs a mother. Another shift, back to the deeper voice. She needs protection. From them. From him. The old man is watching us. He knows. I leaned closer, straining to hear more clearly, and my elbow bumped against a small decorative table in the hallway. A ceramic figurine wobbled, then crashed to the floor, shattering into dozens of pieces. The voice inside the bathroom stopped abruptly. Who's there? It was Natalie's normal voice now, but tinged with confusion. Madison? Is that you? I froze, uncertain whether to reveal myself or retreat. Before I could decide, the bathroom door swung open. Natalie stood in the threshold, her face ghostly in the harsh fluorescent light. She wore a silk robe I'd never seen before, her hair loose around her shoulders, but it was her eyes that caught me. Wide, disoriented, like someone waking from a deep sleep. Richard? She blinked rapidly. What are you doing here? Where's Madison? I struggled to maintain my composure. Madison's working late. Abby called me. She was concerned. Natalie's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. Abby? Is she okay? What happened? She pushed past me, heading toward Abby's room. Abby, honey? I followed closely, my phone still recording in my pocket. When we reached Abby's door, Natalie tried the handle, finding it locked. Abigail Jean Caldwell, open this door right now. She rattled the doorknob frantically. Are you hurt? Answer me. From inside, I could hear the scraping sound of furniture being moved. A moment later, the door opened just enough for Abby's pale face to peer out. When she saw me standing behind Natalie, visible relief washed over her features. I'm fine, she said quietly. I heard noises, I got scared. Natalie knelt down, her face a mask of maternal concern. Oh, sweetie, why didn't you come get me? I was just in the bathroom. Abby's eyes met mine over Natalie's shoulder. You were in there a long time. You didn't answer when I knocked. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Natalie's face. I must have been in the shower. I didn't hear you. She touched her hair, which was completely dry. I was about to shower, I got distracted. By what? I asked, unable to stop myself. Natalie stood slowly, turning to face me. Something in her eyes had changed. A hardness that hadn't been there moments before. I don't think that's any of your business, Richard. I appreciate you coming over, but as you can see, everything is fine. It was just a misunderstanding. Abby slipped out from behind the door, moving to stand beside me. Her small hand found mine again, clinging tightly. Why don't I stay until Madison gets home? I suggested, keeping my voice even. It's no trouble. That won't be necessary, Natalie replied coldly. Madison texted that she's on her way. She held out her hand to Abby. Come on, honey. Let's go downstairs and make some hot chocolate while we wait for her. Abby didn't move. Can Grandpa stay? Please? I could see the calculation happening behind Natalie's eyes, weighing the risk of making a scene against the benefit of appearing reasonable. Finally, she forced a smile. Of course, we'd love to have you join us, Richard. As we headed downstairs, I noticed something that sent another chill through me. In the hallway mirror we passed, Natalie didn't glance at her reflection. Not once. It was as if she was deliberately avoiding seeing herself. But I looked, and in that brief moment, I could have sworn I saw not one reflection, but several, overlapping, shifting, like multiple exposures on a single negative. A trick of the light, perhaps, or my imagination, fueled by fear and suspicion. Or something far more terrifying. The recording from that night burned a hole in my pocket for 3 days. I'd listened to it dozens of times, each playback confirming what I already knew but couldn't quite accept. The different voices, the shifts in tone and vocabulary, the references to the others, and the transitions. It was all there, captured in 4 minutes and 17 seconds of damning audio. But audio wasn't enough. I needed the report, the original psychiatric evaluation that Thomas had hidden away, the one I'd discovered after his death and sealed in my safe. The report that documented, in clinical detail, the fractured mind living inside the woman who was raising my granddaughter. On Thursday morning, I made my decision. The retirement community where I lived was quiet as I backed my Buick out of the garage at 6 a.m. Most of my neighbors were still asleep, their curtains drawn against the pale dawn light. I felt like a fugitive, though I'd committed no crime, not yet anyway. My destination was 2 hours away, the small private practice of Dr. Henry Mercer, the psychiatrist who had evaluated Natalie 3 years earlier, just months before Thomas's death. According to the report, Dr. Mercer had recommended immediate inpatient treatment. Natalie, or one of her personalities, had refused, and Thomas had been in the process of seeking legal options when the accident happened. Dr. Mercer had since retired, moving to a remote cabin in the Adirondacks. Finding his address had required calling in a favor from an old colleague whose daughter worked in medical records. It wasn't strictly legal, but neither was letting an unstable woman with 5 distinct personalities raise a child. The drive took me through mist-covered mountains, the autumn foliage a blaze of crimson and gold against the evergreens. In another life, I might have stopped to admire the view, maybe even take a photo to show Catherine, who had loved the changing seasons. But that was a different time, a different man. The Richard Caldwell who drove those winding roads that morning was focused on only one thing: protecting his granddaughter, whatever the cost. Dr. Mercer's cabin sat at the end of a long gravel driveway, surrounded by towering pines that cast long shadows across the clearing. It was a rustic structure, with a wide porch and smoke curling from the stone chimney. As I parked beside an aging Subaru, a tall, bearded man emerged from the front door. He looked older than his 65 years, his face weathered, his silver hair tied back in a short ponytail. "Mr. Caldwell," he said. Not a question, but a statement. He didn't seem surprised to see me. "I've been expecting you for 3 years. Honestly, I thought you'd come sooner." My knees protested as I climbed out of the car, the mountain air sharp in my lungs. "You remember me?" Dr. Mercer's laugh was without humor. "I remember everyone connected to Natalie Bennett's case. It's not one you forget easily." He gestured toward the cabin. "Come inside. It's too cold to stand out here, and this conversation requires coffee. Strong coffee." The interior of the cabin was spare but comfortable. Bookshelves lining the walls, a fire crackling in the stone hearth, the aroma of freshly ground beans filling the air. Dr. Mercer moved to an old-fashioned percolator on the stove, his movements deliberate, measured. "How much do you know?" he asked without turning around. I settled into a worn leather armchair, my joints grateful for the rest. "I found your report after Thomas died. The complete evaluation, the session transcripts. I've had it locked in my safe for 3 years." Dr. Mercer poured 2 mugs of coffee, black as pitch, and handed one to me. His hands, I noticed, were slightly unsteady. "And you did nothing with that information?" The accusation in his tone stung, but it was deserved. I thought it was under control. Thomas had mentioned concerns about Natalie's mental health, but not the extent. After he died, she seemed stable. Madison, my daughter, she practically worships Natalie. And Abby needed stability, not another trauma. Stability. Dr. Mercer sank into the chair opposite mine, his eyes, keen despite his age, studying me over the rim of his mug. "There's nothing stable about dissociative identity disorder as severe as Natalie's, especially not untreated." He set his coffee down, leaning forward. "Something's happened, hasn't it? One of the alters has become more dominant." I pulled out my phone, queued up the recording, and handed it to him. "Listen for yourself." As the audio played, Dr. Mercer's expression darkened. When it finished, he handed the phone back to me, his face grim. "Martin," and at the end there, a glimpse of Lily. "This isn't good, Mr. Caldwell. Not good at all. I need another copy of your report," I said. "The original documentation with your signature and professional assessment." Dr. Mercer was silent for a long moment, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the distant call of a bird outside. Finally, he rose and crossed to a roll-top desk in the corner. From a locked drawer, he withdrew a thick manila envelope. "I kept copies of everything," he said, his voice heavy with what might have been regret. "Against protocol, but I knew this wasn't over." He handed me the envelope. The complete evaluation, session transcripts, my clinical notes, and my formal recommendation for involuntary commitment, which was never acted upon. The envelope felt impossibly heavy in my hands, 173 pages documenting the fractured psyche of the woman who now controlled my granddaughter's life. "There's something you should know," Dr. Mercer said, resuming his seat. "Something that wasn't in the report because Thomas asked me to keep it confidential." I looked up sharply. "What?" "The trigger for Natalie's complete psychological break. The event that caused the final personality to emerge." He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "It was Madison." "Madison?" I echoed, uncomprehending. "My daughter," but she barely knew Natalie before Thomas introduced them. Dr. Mercer shook his head. "Madison bears a striking resemblance to Natalie's mother, the woman who abused her as a child. The first time Natalie met Madison, it triggered a cascade of repressed memories. The personality you know as Lily emerged as a direct response to that meeting. I felt as though the floor had dropped out from under me. Are you saying Madison is a trigger for Natalie's most dangerous personality? I'm saying that the relationship between those two women is far more complex and potentially volatile than you realize." Dr. Mercer's eyes held mine. "And if Madison doesn't know the truth, if she's still in denial about Natalie's condition, then both she and Abigail are at risk." I clutched the envelope tighter, my mind racing. If what Dr. Mercer said was true, then the situation was even more dangerous than I'd thought. Madison wasn't just enabling Natalie through her denial. She was potentially triggering Lily's emergence through her very presence. The drive back was a blur of mountain roads and tumultuous thoughts. I was so preoccupied that I almost missed the black SUV parked across from my driveway when I finally returned home that afternoon. I might have dismissed it entirely if I hadn't spotted Madison getting out of the passenger side, her face set in a mask of fury I hadn't seen since she was a rebellious teenager. She stormed up to my car before I could even turn off the engine, yanking open my door. "Where have you been?" she demanded, her voice trembling with rage. "And don't lie to me, Dad. I know exactly where you went." I clutched the manila envelope, trying to shield it from her view. "Madison, I can explain." "Explain?" She let out a harsh laugh. "Explain how you went behind my back to dig up ancient history? How you're trying to destroy what's left of our family with your paranoid conspiracy theories?" From the SUV, another figure emerged. Natalie, her face a picture of wounded innocence, tear tracks glistening on her cheeks. "You promised," Madison hissed, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You promised never to bring this up again. You promised to leave it buried." And in that moment, I understood the final devastating truth. Madison already knew. She had always known about Natalie's condition, and she had chosen, deliberately, to keep that knowledge from me, from the authorities, perhaps even from herself. "You knew," I said, the words falling between us like stones. "All this time you knew what Natalie was, what she is." Madison's eyes, so like her mother's, filled with tears of rage and something else. Fear, perhaps, or shame. "You have no right to judge her. No right to judge me. You don't understand what she's been through." "And Abby?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Does she deserve to live with this? To be raised by someone who isn't even the same person from one day to the next?" Madison's face hardened. "Give me that envelope, Dad, now, or I swear to God you'll never see Abby again." The fluorescent lights of the Westchester County Family Court buzzed overhead like angry wasps, casting a sickly pallor over everyone in courtroom 3B. I sat alone at the petitioner's table, my suit, the one I'd worn to Thomas's funeral, hanging slightly loose on my frame. I'd lost 12 pounds in the 3 weeks since my confrontation with Madison, surviving mostly on black coffee and whatever Mrs. Abernathy from next door insisted on bringing over. "All rise," the bailiff called as Judge Eleanor Hoffman entered, a stern woman in her 60s with steel gray hair pulled into a tight bun. She reminded me painfully of Catherine in her later years, the same no-nonsense demeanor, the same penetrating gaze that seemed to cut through pretense. I rose on unsteady legs, acutely aware of Madison and Natalie doing the same at the respondents' table across the aisle. Their attorney, a slick young man in an expensive suit, placed a supportive hand on Natalie's shoulder. She looked exactly as she should, a devoted mother, elegantly dressed in a conservative navy dress, her face a mask of dignified suffering. What the court couldn't see were the 5 different women living behind that carefully composed expression. What they couldn't know was how the personalities shifted and changed, sometimes triggered by nothing more than a word or a gesture. The Martin personality hadn't made an appearance in public yet, that I knew of, but the others slipped in and out so seamlessly that most people never noticed. Most people, except Abby, and me. "Be seated," Judge Hoffman said, shuffling through the papers before her. "We're here on the matter of Caldwell versus Bennett, a petition for emergency temporary custody of minor child Abigail Jean Caldwell, age 11, currently in the custody of her mother, Natalie Bennett." She peered over her reading glasses at me. "Mr. Caldwell, you're representing yourself today?" "Yes, Your Honor." My voice sounded stronger than I felt. "And you're the paternal grandfather of the child in question?" "I am." Judge Hoffman's gaze shifted to Madison and Natalie. "And Ms. Bennett, you're represented by counsel?" The attorney stood. "Yes, Your Honor." Frederick Whitman for the respondent, Natalie Bennett, and also appearing on behalf of Madison Caldwell, the child's paternal aunt, who is joining the respondent in opposing this petition. Judge Hoffman made a note. "Very well. Mr. Caldwell, as petitioner, you may present your case." I'd rehearsed this moment for days, practicing what I would say, how I would present the evidence, the recording, Dr. Mercer's report, Abby's drawings, the notes I'd made documenting the personality shifts I'd witnessed. But standing there, under the harsh lights with my daughter's hostile gaze burning into me, the carefully prepared speech evaporated from my mind. "Your Honor," I began, my voice faltering slightly, "I believe my granddaughter is in immediate danger. Her mother suffers from dissociative identity disorder, what used to be called multiple personality disorder. She has at least 5 distinct personalities, one of which," I glanced at Natalie, who stared back with perfect composure, "one of which has exhibited dangerous tendencies." Before I could continue, Mr. Whitman was on his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. These are unfounded allegations from a man with no medical qualifications whatsoever." "I have evidence," I insisted, reaching for my briefcase. "A complete psychiatric evaluation performed 3 years ago by Dr. Henry Mercer, as well as recordings of—" "Your Honor," Whitman interrupted smoothly, "Dr. Mercer is a discredited psychiatrist whose license was suspended for ethics violations. Any evaluation he performed would be inadmissible and potentially fraudulent." The words hit me like a physical blow. Discredited? Ethics violations? Dr. Mercer had never mentioned anything about this. Judge Hoffman frowned. "Is this true, Mr. Caldwell?" I don't know, Your Honor." The ground seemed to shift beneath my feet. "But I have other evidence. Recordings I've made myself, drawings my granddaughter has created depicting her mother's different personalities. Surreptitious recordings made without consent are inadmissible in New York State," Whitman countered, his tone patronizing. "And children's drawings are hardly diagnostic evidence." Judge Hoffman held up a hand. "Let's take a step back. Mr. Caldwell, do you have any current medical documentation of Ms. Bennett's alleged condition? Evaluations performed by licensed practicing physicians?" "No, Your Honor. Natalie has refused any psychological evaluation since my son's death." "I see." The judge's expression was unreadable. "And has Child Protective Services ever been involved? Have there been any reports of abuse or neglect?" "No, but has the child's school reported any concerns? Behavioral issues, signs of trauma, declining academic performance?" "No, Your Honor." "In fact," Whitman interjected, "Abigail Bennett is a straight-A student who participates in multiple extracurricular activities. Her teachers describe her as well-adjusted and happy." I felt the case slipping away from me with each passing moment. "Your Honor, please. The evidence might not meet legal standards, but I know what I've seen. My granddaughter is afraid of her mother. She's witnessed these personality shifts firsthand." Judge Hoffman's gaze softened slightly. "Mr. Caldwell, I understand your concern for your granddaughter, but I need more than your personal observations to remove a child from her mother's custody." She turned to the bailiff. "Please bring in Abigail Caldwell. I'd like to speak with her directly." My heart leapt. Abby would tell the truth. She would confirm everything I'd been saying. A side door opened, and Abby entered, looking smaller than ever in a prim blue dress that matched Natalie's. Her eyes found mine immediately. and I tried to convey reassurance with my gaze. Everything would be okay now. She just needed to tell the judge what she'd told me. "Hello, Abigail," Judge Hoffman said kindly. "Do you know why we're all here today?" Abby nodded, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "My grandpa wants me to live with him instead of with my mom." "That's right. And I'd like to ask you a very important question. You don't need to worry about hurting anyone's feelings. I just want you to tell me the truth." The judge leaned forward slightly. "Abigail, do you want to live with your grandfather instead of your mother?" The courtroom fell silent. I could hear the ticking of the wall clock, the soft whir of the air conditioning, the blood pounding in my ears. Abby's eyes darted to Natalie, then to Madison, then back to me. Her lower lip trembled slightly. But before she could answer, Madison stood up. Her voice rang out clear and cold in the hushed courtroom. "Mom was right, Dad. You're mentally ill. You've been inventing these stories ever since Thomas died. You see things that aren't there." The words struck me like physical blows, each one landing with devastating precision. My own daughter, the little girl I'd raised alone after Eleanor abandoned us, the child I'd read bedtime stories to and taught to ride a bike, and comforted through her first heartbreak. She stood in a courtroom and declared me insane in front of a judge, in front of my granddaughter. "Madison," I whispered, my voice breaking. "How could you?" She continued as if she hadn't heard me, her eyes fixed on Judge Hoffman. "My father has been struggling with paranoid delusions since my brother's death. His doctor has prescribed medication, but he often refuses to take it. He's created this elaborate fantasy about my sister-in-law having multiple personalities because he can't accept that Thomas is gone." Her voice softened, taking on a rehearsed quality of concern. "We've tried to get him help, Your Honor, we really have. But he won't accept that he needs it." Judge Hoffman's expression had changed, the sympathy in her eyes now directed not at me, but at Madison and Natalie. "I see," she said quietly. "It's not true," I protested, my voice hoarse with desperation. "Madison, tell them the truth. You know about Natalie's condition. You've always known." Abby stood frozen, her eyes wide with confusion and fear, tears beginning to spill down her cheeks. "Your Honor," Mr. Whitman said smoothly, "we have documentation from Mr. Caldwell's physician indicating concerns about cognitive decline and possible delusional disorder. We didn't want to introduce it unless necessary, out of respect for Mr. Caldwell's privacy, but given the nature of his allegations." He approached the bench, handing the judge a folder I'd never seen before. My mind reeled. My doctor, Dr. Patel, had never said anything about cognitive decline or delusions. We'd discussed my heart condition, my arthritis, but never any mental health concerns. As Judge Hoffman reviewed the documents, Madison returned to her seat. She didn't look at me again. Beside her, Natalie dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, the perfect picture of a woman wrongfully accused. And in that moment, looking at my daughter's profile, so like her mother's, so like the woman who had walked out on us 30 years ago, I finally understood. Madison wasn't just protecting Natalie. She was protecting herself from the truth, from having to face the reality that the maternal figure she'd latched onto after her own mother's abandonment was just as fractured, just as unreliable. "In light of this information," Judge Hoffman said, closing the folder, "I'm denying the petition for emergency custody. Furthermore, I'm ordering a psychological evaluation of Mr. Caldwell before any further custody or visitation arrangements can be considered." The room seemed to tilt around me. I'd failed. Failed Abby, failed Thomas, failed myself. And in the process, I'd lost my daughter too, perhaps forever. 3 days after the devastating court hearing, I sat alone in my study, surrounded by the wreckage of what had once been a methodically organized life. Papers were strewn across every surface. Medical records, legal documents, printouts of research on dissociative identity disorder. An empty bottle of bourbon stood sentinel beside a half-empty glass, though I'd barely touched the amber liquid inside. I needed clarity, not oblivion. My cell phone had been silent since the hearing. No calls from Madison, no secret messages from Abby. It was as if a chasm had opened between us, too wide and too deep to bridge with mere words. In my darkest moments, I wondered if Madison had been right, if grief had twisted my perception, making me see things that weren't there. But then I would replay the recording from that rainy night, hear the different voices emerging from Natalie's mouth, and know with bone-deep certainty that I wasn't crazy. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 9 times. each resonant note a reminder of passing time. 3 days without seeing Abby. 3 days without knowing if she was safe. 3 days of imagining the worst. The doorbell rang, startling me from my reverie. My heart leapt with hope. Perhaps Madison had reconsidered or Abby had found a way to visit. But when I opened the door, I found neither my daughter nor my granddaughter on the porch. Instead, Dr. Henry Mercer stood there, his silver hair damp from the light drizzle, a weathered leather briefcase clutched in his gnarled hands. "May I come in?" he asked without preamble. "We have work to do." I stepped aside wordlessly, watching as he entered and surveyed the chaos of my living room with a clinical eye. "You've been busy," he observed, picking up a printout about legal standards for psychiatric commitment. "I lost," I said, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "The judge threw out your report. Whitman, their lawyer, said your license was suspended for ethics violations." Dr. Mercer's face hardened. "A technical suspension during an investigation instigated by a former patient. A patient who, coincidentally, was friends with Natalie's father. The suspension was lifted when the allegations proved baseless. But mud sticks, doesn't it?" He set his briefcase on the coffee table. "I didn't come here to defend my reputation, Mr. Caldwell. I came because I received this in the mail yesterday." From the briefcase, he withdrew a padded envelope. Inside was a small USB drive and a folded note written in childish handwriting. My heart constricted when I recognized Abby's careful penmanship. "Please help Grandpa," the note read. "I found this in Mom's special box under the floorboards. It's from when Daddy was alive. She doesn't know I took it." My hands trembled as I plugged the drive into my laptop. A single video file appeared, dated 3 years earlier, just weeks before Thomas's fatal accident. I clicked play, and my son's face filled the screen. Thomas looked exhausted, dark circles shadowing his eyes, his normally immaculate appearance disheveled. He sat in what appeared to be his home office, speaking directly to the camera. "If you're watching this, Dad," he began, his voice tight with strain, "then something's happened to me, or things have gotten worse with Natalie. This is my insurance policy, my proof that I'm not crazy, that what's happening in this house is real." I sank into my chair, a physical ache spreading through my chest at the sight of my son, vibrant, alive, unaware of how little time he had left. The video continued, Thomas explaining how he'd first noticed Natalie's personality shifts shortly after Abby's birth, how he'd initially attributed the changes to postpartum depression, then to stress, then to anything other than the terrifying reality, how he'd finally convinced her to see Dr. Mercer, only to have her abandon treatment when the diagnosis became clear. "I've been documenting everything," Thomas said, running a hand through his hair. "The transitions, the different personalities, the missing time she can't account for. I've installed cameras in the common areas of the house, not the bathrooms or bedrooms. I wouldn't violate her privacy that way, but enough to capture evidence." The video then cut to a series of clips. Natalie in the kitchen, speaking in a childlike voice to Abby's stuffed animals arranged at the table. Natalie in the living room, her posture rigid as she rearranged every object with precise, measured movements. Natalie at the front door, introducing herself to the mail carrier as Cassie Bennett, registered nurse. But most disturbing was a clip from what appeared to be the middle of the night. Natalie stood in the darkened living room, speaking in a deep, masculine voice to Thomas off camera. "She doesn't need to remember what happens when I'm in control," the voice, Martin's voice, said. "I protect her from the memories. I protect the child too. But you're trying to destroy the system. I can't allow that." The final clip showed Natalie sitting at the kitchen table writing in a notebook. When Thomas called her name, she looked up, but her eyes were different, cold and calculating in a way I'd never seen before. "She's not here right now," she said, her voice cultured, precise. "But I can take a message if you'd like." "Who am I speaking to?" Thomas asked, his voice remarkably steady. A slow smile spread across Natalie's face, one that never reached those empty eyes. "You can call me Lily. I'm the one who handles difficult situations." The video ended abruptly, cutting back to Thomas in his office. "I'm going to Dr. Mercer tomorrow with this footage," he said, his expression resolute. "We're filing for emergency commitment. I can't let this continue, not with Abby in the house. If something happens to me, Dad, this is your proof. Protect my daughter, please." The screen went black, leaving Dr. Mercer and me sitting in stunned silence. My son had known. He'd had proof. and he'd been on his way to get help when his car went off that rain-slicked road. The accident, I whispered, the implications dawning on me with horrifying clarity. It might not have been an accident at all. Dr. Mercer's expression was grave. We can't know that for certain. But this video, combined with my evaluation and your recordings, it might be enough to convince the court. But how? I asked, desperation edging my voice. The judge already ruled against me. She thinks I'm delusional. There's another hearing tomorrow for the final custody determination, Dr. Mercer said. I've taken the liberty of filing a motion to appear as an expert witness with new evidence. Judge Hoffman may have doubts about my credentials, but she can't ignore video evidence from the deceased father. Hope flickered within me. Fragile, but persistent. Do you think it will be enough? Dr. Mercer's smile didn't reach his eyes. It has to be. Because if Lily is emerging more frequently, as your recordings suggest, then both Madison and Abigail are in serious danger. The next morning, I stood once again in courtroom 3B, but this time I wasn't alone. Dr. Mercer sat beside me at the petitioner's table, his presence lending legitimacy to my claims. Across the aisle, Madison and Natalie huddled with their attorney, casting occasional glances in our direction. Madison's face was a mask of cold fury, but beneath it I detected something else. Fear, perhaps, or uncertainty. Natalie, by contrast, appeared perfectly composed, though I noticed her fingers drumming a precise rhythm on the table. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. A pattern I'd seen before in one of Thomas's videos. Cassie's pattern. When Judge Hoffman entered, her gaze lingered on Dr. Mercer before shifting to me. I understand there's new evidence to be presented in this case, she said, her tone neutral. Yes, Your Honor, I replied, my voice steadier than I'd expected. Video evidence recorded by my late son, Thomas Caldwell, documenting his wife's condition before his death. Mr. Whitman was on his feet immediately. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Any such evidence should have been disclosed during discovery. We only received it yesterday, Your Honor, Dr. Mercer interjected. It was provided by the minor child herself, who found it among her mother's possessions. Judge Hoffman's eyebrows rose. The child provided this evidence? Yes, Your Honor, I confirmed. My granddaughter located it and sent it to Dr. Mercer, asking for his help. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Hoffman tapped her gavel once, restoring silence. I'll allow the evidence to be presented. Mr. Caldwell, you may proceed. As Thomas's face appeared on the courtroom monitor, I heard Madison's sharp intake of breath. Beside her, Natalie went very still, her eyes fixed on the screen with an intensity that was almost predatory. When the video finished, the courtroom was silent, save for Madison's quiet sobbing. Judge Hoffman's expression had transformed from skepticism to grave concern. Ms. Bennett, she said, addressing Natalie directly, would you care to respond to what we've just seen? Natalie stood slowly, smoothing her immaculate skirt with practiced grace. But when she spoke, the voice that emerged wasn't the one I'd been expecting. They're trying to silence us, Martin, she whispered, her gaze fixed on some middle distance. They'll never understand, never forgive. The courtroom erupted in confused murmurs. Mr. Whitman grabbed Natalie's arm, whispering urgently, but she shook him off with surprising strength. Ms. Bennett, Judge Hoffman prompted. Natalie's posture shifted subtly, her shoulders squaring, her chin lifting. When she spoke again, her voice was deeper, more authoritative. The child is under my protection. I won't let you take her away, not like the others. Madison was on her feet now, her face ashen. Natalie, stop, please. But something in Natalie's eyes had changed. A coldness, a calculation that sent chills down my spine. She turned to Madison with a smile that contained no warmth. Natalie isn't available right now, she said, her voice cultured, precise, Lily's voice. But I'd be happy to take a message. Winter came early to Westchester that year. The first snow fell on a Tuesday in late November, blanketing my small backyard in pristine white that reminded me of fresh hospital sheets. It had been 6 weeks since that final day in court. 6 weeks since Judge Hoffman had suspended Natalie's custody and granted me temporary guardianship of Abby. 6 weeks since I'd last spoken to Madison. The aftermath of the courtroom revelation played on an endless loop in my mind. Natalie, or rather Lily, had become increasingly agitated as the proceedings continued, eventually requiring court officers to restrain her when she lunged toward the bench, screaming that they were conspiring against her. The transformation had been so complete, so undeniable, that even Mr. Whitman had been left speechless, his legal arguments crumbling in the face of the very evidence he'd been dismissing as fantasy. Judge Hoffman had ordered an immediate psychiatric evaluation. 3 different specialists had confirmed Dr. Mercer's original diagnosis: dissociative identity disorder with 5 distinct alters, 2 of which, Martin and Lily, presented potential dangers to both Natalie herself and those around her. Natalie had been committed to Oak Ridge Psychiatric Center for intensive treatment. The prognosis, according to Dr. Lewiston, her new psychiatrist, was uncertain. DID was treatable but complex, requiring years of therapy to integrate the fractured personalities into a cohesive whole. There were no guarantees of success, especially in a case as severe as Natalie's, where the alters had been functioning autonomously for so long. I stood at my kitchen window, watching the snow accumulate on the bird feeder I'd built with Thomas when he was 10 years old. The coffee in my mug had grown cold, but I couldn't bring myself to move away from the window, from the memories each snowflake seemed to carry. "Grandpa?" Abby's voice pulled me from my reverie. She stood in the doorway, wrapped in the quilt Catherine had made for her when she was born, her dark hair tousled from sleep. "Can we make pancakes?" I smiled, setting down the cold coffee. "Of course, Pumpkin. Blueberry or chocolate chip?" "Both?" She offered a hopeful grin, one I hadn't seen often enough in the weeks since she'd come to live with me permanently. As we moved around the kitchen together, mixing batter and heating the griddle, I marveled at her resilience. 11 years old, and she'd already endured more trauma than most adults. Losing her father, living with a mother whose identity shifted like quicksand, being caught in a custody battle that had torn our family apart. Yet here she was, carefully measuring blueberries into the batter, humming softly to herself. "Do you think Mom will ever get better?" she asked suddenly, her voice small but steady. I paused, spatula in hand, considering my answer carefully. I'd promised myself I would never lie to Abby, would never shield her from difficult truths the way Madison had tried to do, but I also wouldn't burden her with my darkest fears. "Dr. Lewiston is very good at his job," I said finally, "and your mom is getting the help she needs now. That's the most important thing." Abby nodded, accepting this non-answer with the wisdom of a child who had learned early that some questions don't have satisfying answers. "And Aunt Madison?" she pressed. "Will she ever come back?" The question pierced me with fresh pain. Madison hadn't returned my calls or emails since the court hearing. The only communication had been through her assistant at the law firm, arranging for Abby's belongings to be delivered to my house. "I hope so, Pumpkin," I said, flipping a pancake with more force than necessary. She's trying to understand everything that happened. Sometimes that takes time." What I didn't say was that Madison's absence felt like a deliberate punishment, not just for exposing Natalie's condition but for being right all along. My daughter had built her entire adult identity around being the stable one, the rational one, the one who hadn't abandoned her family like her mother had. Admitting that she'd enabled Natalie's dangerous condition, that she'd chosen willful blindness over facing an uncomfortable truth, would require a level of self-reflection she might not be capable of. After breakfast, while Abby was upstairs getting dressed, the doorbell rang. My heart leapt with irrational hope. Perhaps Madison had finally decided to reach out to bridge the gulf between us. But when I opened the door, it wasn't my daughter standing on the porch. It was a courier, holding out a large manila envelope. "Richard Caldwell?" he asked, consulting his digital clipboard. "That's me. Sign here, please." I scrawled my signature and took the envelope, noting the return address, Madison's law firm. My hands trembled slightly as I closed the door and retreated to my study to open it. Inside was a formal letter on the firm's letterhead, and beneath it, a thicker document bound with a blue cover. The letter was brief, clinical. "Dear Mr. Caldwell," enclosed, "please find a copy of the final custody agreement regarding Abigail Jean Caldwell, as approved by the court. The original has been filed with the Westchester County Family Court. Please note that this agreement includes the stipulation that Madison Caldwell will have supervised visitation rights on alternating weekends beginning December 7, 2024. Sincerely, Frederick Whitman, Esquire, supervised visitation." As if Madison herself were a danger to Abby. As if she hadn't been a loving, if misguided, presence in my granddaughter's life since Thomas's death. Beneath the letter was a handwritten note on Madison's personal stationery. "Dad, I've decided to move forward with the Boston position. I start in January. I think the distance will be good for all of us. I need time to process everything that's happened, to understand my own role in it. Maybe someday we can rebuild what's been broken, but not now. Not yet. I'll see Abby according to the visitation schedule. Please don't make this harder than it already is. Madison. The note slipped from my fingers, floating to the carpet like a fallen leaf. Boston. 6 hours away. Madison wasn't just creating emotional distance. She was ensuring physical separation as well. I understood her need to escape, to reinvent herself somewhere new. Hadn't I done the same after Eleanor left, throwing myself into work and parenting to avoid facing the wreckage of my marriage? But understanding didn't lessen the pain, the sense of profound loss. That evening, after Abby had gone to bed, I found myself standing in the doorway of her room, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest as she slept. On her nightstand sat 5 stuffed animals: a bear, a rabbit, a dog, a cat, and an elephant, each positioned with careful precision. 5, not the usual 1 or 2 a child might keep close. I'd noticed this pattern before. 5 place settings at the dinner table when only the 2 of us were eating. 5 bookmarks in the novel she was reading. 5 colored pencils laid out even when she was drawing with only blue and green. It was her way of processing, I supposed, of making sense of the incomprehensible. 5 distinct beings existing in one space, separate yet connected. Moving quietly so as not to wake her, I approached the bed and gently tucked the quilt more securely around her shoulders. As I did, I noticed something clutched in her hand, a photograph, worn around the edges from frequent handling. It showed Thomas, Natalie, and a much younger Abby at what appeared to be a beachside picnic. They were smiling, the perfect family captured in a moment of genuine happiness. Had such moments been real? Had there been times when Natalie, the core Natalie, not one of her alters, had truly been present as a loving mother and wife? Or had it all been an elaborate performance, a masterful mimicry of normalcy? I would never know for certain, but what I did know with bone-deep conviction was that the small girl sleeping before me deserved a chance at stability, at safety, at a life where the people who loved her remained consistently themselves from one day to the next. As I closed Abby's door, I whispered a silent promise to Thomas wherever he might be. I would give his daughter what he hadn't lived long enough to provide, a home where she never had to fear the shifting sands of identity, where she never had to wonder which version of a loved one she might encounter from one moment to the next. It wasn't the family any of us had envisioned. Madison's absence left a hole that might never be filled. Natalie's treatment would be long and uncertain. And I was an aging man with creaky knees and a heart that had already endured more than its share of breaking. But for Abby, I would be the one constant in a world that had proven all too changeable, the one face that never shifted, the one voice that never altered, the one love that never fractured into pieces. It would have to be enough. Sometimes the most difficult choices we face aren't between right and wrong, but between painful truths and comfortable lies. I lost my daughter to protect my granddaughter. I sacrificed one relationship to save another. Was it worth it? Every time I see Abby sleeping peacefully, knowing she's safe, I have my answer, though the weight of that decision still keeps me awake at night. What would you have done in my position? Would you have kept that psychiatric report locked away, preserving your family's fragile peace at the cost of a child's safety? Or would you have done as I did, exposing the truth regardless of the consequences? The faces we show to the world aren't always our true selves, and sometimes those we love most deeply are hiding behind masks we're too afraid to remove. If this story touched you, remember that courage isn't about being fearless, it's about facing your fears for those who cannot protect themselves. Share this video with someone who's had to make an impossible choice for the right reasons. Follow this channel for more stories that illuminate the darkest corners of human experience. And don't forget to like and comment about what you would have done in my shoes. Because in the end, we're all just trying to protect the people we love, even when it breaks our hearts to do so.